Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's stories are on the homeless. Joining me today is As the Raven Dreams. He's also been responsible for making my thumbnails over the last few months, so show him some love and sub to his channel. Now onto the stories. I really wish I didn't have to write this down, but I don't think I'll be getting much sleep tonight anyway, so I figured I might as well share with you what's going on in my house right now. A couple of points relevant to the story. I'm a student who is currently pursuing a higher education abroad. The country I reside in is the Netherlands. I live with two other people whose rooms are on the same floor as mine. One flatmate in particular is slightly problematic. More on that later. I cannot possibly go out because there's a curfew in this place, and if I go out, I risk facing a fine. I live on the 3rd floor, and the living room is located on the 2nd floor. I was working from home and I took a break from work to go wash my plate in the kitchen. I usually enter my room because I want to be close to my laptop in case something at work happens. The kitchen is located right next to the living room on the 2nd floor, and in order to get there, I need to go downstairs and move through the living room. Please keep in mind that it's 11 p.m. here, and Netherlands is pretty dark outside. So I go down and I turn on the lights in the kitchen without turning the lights on in the living room. I wash my plate, and right as I'm about to leave the kitchen and turn the lights off, I see a silhouette getting up from the couch and laying down again. This is at the moment where my heart sank, and I started wondering if I was seeing things. I wasn't brave enough to check and see what's going on, so I lowered my body down really quietly and went upstairs. I was literally crawling up the stairs at one point. So finally I reach my floor, and then I knock on one of my flatmate's rooms. I respect his privacy, and I will not share details about his appearance, but for the sake of clarity, I'm going to refer to him as Kevin from now on. Now, Kevin is a fascinating individual, to say the least. He has 3 kids from multiple women, and according to him, there's a 4th on the way. He is generally nice, but tends to get crazy drunk, and some of the parties he throws at our place tend to be incredibly loud and unpleasant for the rest of the tenants. After our landlord warned him, he no longer seems to invite people over. Thank God for that. But he still gets drunk pretty frequently, and is usually a mess. I'm not going to share any more stories about him, but based on my experience, I assumed that if anyone knows what the fuck was going on downstairs, it would be him. So Kevin opens the door, and I ask him if he knows anything about the person sleeping on the couch in the living room. I have calmed down a bit since. I reached the conclusion that it's just one of Kevin's friends who simply crashed on our couch. No big deal. But I wanted to make sure just in case. Turns out, I was only halfway there. This person was in fact there because of Kevin, but they are not a friend of Kevin's. They're a homeless person that were found by Kevin on his way home today. They have never met each other before, but Kevin felt bad for him and offered them to sleep on his couch at our place for the night. I'm fucking speechless. I don't mind having people over every now and again, and I have nothing against homeless people, but I think that inviting a complete stranger over to spend a night in our place without at least discussing it with your flatmates is somewhat inconsiderate, to say the least. There's a fucking pandemic raging on worldwide, so this whole situation isn't exactly in our best interest either. I did consider going to a friend's place and spend the night there, but I'm not really interested in going downstairs for the time being. Plus, I risk getting a fine, as going out after 9 p.m. is prohibited. I used to reside in the city of Houston. I grew up in the burbs, but moved to the inner city as soon as I could get away from the strip malls and chain restaurants. I moved to the inner loop Houston. The 610 loop is a freeway that unofficially separates the metro core from the residential and industrial outskirts of the city. I was living in a small, historic neighborhood that was mostly attractive to college students, artist types, young people, gays, etc. Montrose is pretty socially liberal and probably the most out there Houston neighborhoods, culturally speaking. Lots of cool antique rental properties and garden apartments for singles and couples in their 20s. but not the kind of area that most people can afford to purchase a house or have a space for a family. I was very young when I first moved to Montrose, so I ate it up. The dive bars, restaurants, music clubs, coffee shops, street fest, proximity to museum district. It was great, but every pro has its con. It wasn't super scary crime-ridden or anything, or at least I never felt unsafe there, but it was a little rough around the edges. Drugs were easy to come by. Car break-ins were relatively common. My window got smashed in twice in 4 years, which seemed about the average. There was a decent-sized homeless population to be berated by. Don't get me wrong, most of them were perfectly polite and harmless, but there were a good handful that were bold, shameless, and persistent. While muggings weren't on the norm, to my knowledge, none of my friends were ever mugged. It was definitely important to be aware of your surroundings if you were out and about, especially if you were alone, or if it was after dark. So one morning, about 8 a.m., I'm heading to work. I stop off by the drugstore on the corner next to my apartment. I grab a juice and some cigarettes before I hit the bulk of my commute. There's typically at least one homeless guy hanging out in this particular pharmacy lot at any given time, but it's not worrying. They're usually passed out and no trouble, just resting in the shade from the structure, away from the hot sun. As I'm walking in, I see a grizzled, white homeless dude wandering around the far end of the parking lot, quite a ways away from me. It seems strange, as they do not tend to panhandle here, and it's too hot to be comfortably wandering around on the asphalt in direct sunlight. Additionally, I don't see any cars parked on that side of the lot, and there's no one around him to interact with, so his movements seemed aimless and random. He sort of glances my way, but it's hard to tell from the distance if he's looking at me or not. From where I'm standing, it looks like his eyes are just randomly darting around, fixating on one part of the parking lot, and then quickly strides to the empty spot, and then he finds another spot a few feet away to look at. I don't feel threatened, but I'm definitely aware of his presence. I make it into Walgreens undeterred, get my stuff, and wait in line to pay. I'm inside for 2 to 3 minutes tops. I step out the exit and glance towards my car. I feel relieved when I don't see Mr. Crazy on my end of the parking lot, so I start walking to my parking spot. I've made it about 5 to 10 feet from the store's exit. The car's about another 20 feet or so away, when he appears seemingly out of nowhere and steps directly in front of me, blocking my path. He asks me if I have any money I can give him. He's older and pretty worse for wear. I feel bad for him, but I'm creeped out and in a hurry to get to work. I tell him what I often say to panhandlers, and it's usually true. Sorry, I don't have any cash. I step around him and keep walking, quickening my pace. I hear his footsteps follow me just as quickly. From behind me, he demands, "I know you have change." At this point, I'm rushing to the car. I'm a hair away from breaking into a sprint. "Sorry, I can't help you," I loudly respond, without so much as glancing back towards the nutterball McGee, who was still on my ass. I hit the unlock button on my keys and have my arm out, ready to reach for the door handle. My hand slides onto the handle, yanks the car door open, and I jump into the driver's side of my sedan. Before I'm even seated correctly, I immediately grasp out to slam the door and lock it, but too late. The Psycho Sam is now facing me, standing in the space between the opened car door and I, blocking me from closing it with his entire body. My car is just a standard 4-door, so as you could imagine, I am in awfully close quarters with this guy. To make it even worse, he leans down so his face is just about level with mine. His hair and beard are unkempt. His eyes are wild, as I needed further confirmation that this is not a sane individual. "Give me all your money." He didn't point any weapons, at least that I could see, or scream or raise his voice. He just sternly said the words in a very matter-of-fact tone. I was terrified. I stared up at him for a second, not knowing what to do. In an instant, adrenaline slammed into me, and instead of immediately responding to his demands, I kept eye contact with him on my left side, while my right hand shoved the key into the ignition and turned it on. No, was all I could squeak out. That was the day I ran over a hobo's foot. I would do it again too, if I had to. Fuck that guy.
So, I work at a pet boarding and daycare facility in the middle of Florida. We have a lot of homeless encounters, but this one is by far the scariest. We open at 8 every day of the week. However, all staff must come in at 7 to make sure all guests are walked and fed before we open. This particular morning, around 7:10, I was on my second dog in our back walking yards, and I had seen some commotion around the front bushes that separate our front walking yard for the smaller dogs, and it's directly in front of the yard I was in. I figured someone just had an early drop-off. However, a few moments later, I then hear something like pottery shattering. This, of course, piqued my interest, and I walked through the front walking yard and inside to our front boarding area to ask the receptionist if she had heard all of the commotion while she was cleaning the little dogs area. She said that she had not, but that a homeless man had come in and asked to use the bathroom, and she let him in. He did creep her out some as he was mumbling and not looking her into the face as he spoke, but she just wanted to be kind to the man and he gave her no issues. I then go into the front reception area to check outside for the possible source of the noise, and I see the man. And he's rummaging through his backpack while his bike is leaned up against our building. He then got up and started pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, and his presence made me quite uncomfortable. So, while he wasn't looking, I went and locked the front door. After this was done, I stepped back to watch him from the room next to our reception area, and I see that he's screaming and flailing his arms as if he's arguing with someone. This seems like cause for alarm, so I run and grab the second kennel attendant, and we call the police as this man is destroying our Memorial Day decorations outside and still yelling. Once he notices my coworker on the phone, he says, "You don't need to call the police. Can I just come in and have some water?" He then tries to open the door and realizes that it's locked, and immediately freaks out screaming at us, and is threatening us saying, "Call the freaking police. Let me in this freaking building," etc., while banging on the door. He then hears the sirens from an unrelated situation and decides to ride off. After a good amount of time, I go to inspect what he was breaking, and it turns out that he had taken all of our flags out of the ground and broke them, and then threw them on the sidewalk, as well as taking our wreaths down and throwing them, one landing behind the dumpster at 20 feet away. He also had smashed a small porcelain container that he had brought with him, as well as throwing a keycard to a hotel, some orange duct tape, black rope, and a travel-sized bottle of shampoo with the orange duct tape over the top of it. The police never showed up, because he had rode away while we were on the phone with him, but it definitely was the scariest thing that I've experienced while working there. My mom was visiting me in San Francisco last month, and we were out viewing the sights and whatnot when we decided to call a Lyft to take us home. As we're waiting at the corner, I spot this man trying to cross the street towards us, but there's a steady stream of cars blocking his path. His eyes are completely locked on me, barely even looking at the cars that he's trying to avoid being hit by. I feel really uneasy. Our cab pulls up on the other side of the street and is fixing to make a U-turn when I grab my mom's arm and cross the street to get into the cab, and I ask the driver to lock the doors. Just as my mom gets in the back seat after me and shuts her door, That same guy has crossed the street, ran after us, and is banging on the window, screaming and yelling, and trying to open her side door. The light turns green and we drive away. I'm not sure what he wanted or why he was so set on us. He was clearly homeless. But if he wanted money, why not ask any of the other people out on that street instead of chasing us down in a cab? I'm not sure what would have happened if we waited for our car to turn around, or if we hadn't locked the doors and he managed to get in. Very determined jaywalking guy. Let's not meet. On a nice, windy summer evening, I was walking my girlfriend at the time to the tram station so that she would go home. She lived in a shady part of the town, so creepy encounters were expected. As we were on our way, a homeless guy approaches us and asks us for $1. Fully aware that my left hand was holding my ex's hand, so I couldn't defend myself in case I needed to, and that robberies or assaults are common in that area, I just shrugged him off. He suddenly jumped in front of me, pointed at me, and said, "You will be next." It's been 3 years, and I'm still curious what that meant. Here, certain schools like mine have 2 class sessions, which is the morning session, 6 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., and afternoon session, 12:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. And, in my case, I'm in the afternoon classes. So, back on Monday, it was 6:30 p.m., our teacher let us walk home early, because it was the first day and no subject teachers yet. I was standing by the school gates because of the traffic, and so many students crossing the street. Then, there's this one man, I assume in his 40s. He was just standing behind me and staring at me. He complimented me by telling me that I smell really good, and I thanked him for it and just proceeded to look at the street. When I then crossed the street after it became passable, he followed me, but I didn't see him. But then suddenly my gut feeling told me that something was wrong with him, so I stopped walking. And, as expected, he stopped walking too. Then I asked him in our language, "Why are you following me?" He answered, "You look really nice, apart from smelling good." I then tried running away from him, but he managed to catch me, and he started grabbing me by my neck and shoulders, so I hit him on the waist with my left elbow and spat on him. He tried strangling me, but I hit him in the crotch, so I'd had time to escape. Thankfully, I saw my 3 friends walking in groups, and I tagged along with them until I turned towards the street that leads to my house. And worse, seeing how dirty his hands were, my favorite white shirt that I was wearing at the time got stained by his dirty hands. And I took a shower when I got home because of how bad he smelled when he touched me. Yuck. I'm not certain if he will come back since it just happened a few days ago. And worse, there has been a trend of upticks in kidnappings and missing people in my province.
This is just a random and weird encounter I remembered from when I was 15, and it scared me. It was the day of my prom for my grade level, so I'm all dressed up and on my way to my friend's house to meet her there. My mom parks in front of her house. This area was kinda dodgy, where once in a while you'd see a homeless, junky person. I was sitting in the back of the car about to leave when this homeless looking man opens my car door. He sits inside across from me and closes the door. At this point, I'm like, what the fuck? He doesn't even say anything and had no expression, just sits there. I'm like, what are you doing? My mom is shocked and saying the same thing. I can't believe I had the audacity to say, get out, and then I tried to open the door for him and push him out. I don't know why I did that. He was so much bigger than me. Finally, he's like, okay, I'm getting out, and slowly leaves. My mom just drives off and we wait for a bit, so I can come back and meet my friend. I'm just glad he didn't have a knife or something. Friday night, I was getting beer and a burger at a tavern on a small inner city street. I was waiting for my Uber, but some guy came up to me and asked me for $1. I said no, and instead of the guy moving on, he just stood there. I then decided to go back into the bar, standing in the front entrance. The guy didn't move and had an angry look on his face. I then walked back into the bar for a few minutes, moving away from the door. When I came back to try to leave again, the guy was still there. It was at this point that I finally said something to the bartender, who then walked out, and that's when the guy started finally moving on. However, he only walked a few stores down, like he was still waiting for me. It wasn't until someone else, another large guy, walked out that the dude finally seemed to move on. My Uber finally came and I spilled the whole story to her, and we both agreed that he was looking to jump me. I was so creeped out. I'm used to panhandlers, but I'm not used to panhandlers that don't immediately move on when you say no. I live in a relatively large city in Virginia that has a large university in the north side of the city. We have a rather impressive homeless population, especially near the university, and there's always at least one hanging out on every single street corner. We have a fair share of crime, like any other large city. This happened while I was still in college, about 2012 or so. On our main busy thoroughfare is the main event building for basketball games, graduation ceremonies, etc., along with a huge campus Barnes & Noble, some restaurants, all of that. 3 lanes going in both directions, with a median in the middle. I was walking down one side of the road, up against the buildings going towards the bookstore, and a man, who appeared to be homeless, began to follow me, keeping up with my pace a few feet away to the street. He popped out a pretty large pocket knife and held it so the handle was hidden by his jacket sleeve, but you could see the blade and heard it when it popped open. He was grinning. He started mimicking my steps, the length of stride, and he'd stop when I'd stop. It was almost comical the way he moved, like out of a movie. He had a pep in his step, kind of sliding his feet with each step, almost like he was dancing to the pace that we were walking. He never said a word, just kept grinning and following, copying my movements. This went on for about 2 blocks until I stopped at the entrance of the bookstore and stepped up the 3 steps leading up to it. I made eye contact with him, and he stays below. He didn't try to follow me in. Maybe he would have if I never turned to face him. Who knows? He suddenly turned in a rather dramatic movement and stepped out into the road between cars that were trying to parallel park. Luckily, the traffic light right before he stepped out had just turned green, so cars were still waiting and hadn't hit their gas pedal yet to go. He stood there just grinning until a car stopped right in front of him and the driver yelled at him and threw something when he didn't react to the blaring horn. No idea what this guy wanted or what he would have done if it was night or something, when the area is less populated. I'm 29 now and in a great home with my partner of 6 years. We are very happy, but life wasn't always so great. I went through a really tough time at the age of 17. I found myself homeless in the streets of Glasgow. It was cold and I saw another side of life, a side I never want to see again. It started with me leaving my family home due to disagreements with my mom. I slept rough for a few days under the staircase in the city central, ironically across from a 5-star hotel. I eventually heard about a place I could go live. This was sort of a halfway house between being homeless, then rehomed. I quickly moved into this building. You got breakfast in the morning and advised to keep yourself busy during the day. I tried going on long walks, etc. Eventually you get sucked into socializing with some people. At first I thought this would be okay, but things quickly went south. I befriended my neighbor in the facility. He used drugs and I didn't. I tried to play it cool, but things got scary quickly. He started asking me for money that I didn't have. He then persisted in following me everywhere I went, like an unwanted sidekick. I woke up one night to banging on the room door. This place held about 10 people, small rooms with basic amenities. The pounding got louder, then shouting started. The lock on the door was flimsy at best. Bang bang. I know you're in there. I freaked out, frantically texting my mom, asking to come home. She said it would be okay, and to brave it out. Then the man shouted, "If I see you again, I will slice you from ear to ear." I thought enough shaking, and called the police and the facility manager. The police came and arrested the man. He was hiding something that enraged him. With deep-set eyes, holding a kitchen knife, and moments away from bursting into the room. He was taken away and I never got the guy's name. But for the junkie in the homeless shelter, let's never meet again. I'm great now and have moved on. The worst part of it was that at this time my little sister was at school and she met me at a shop a few days later. I had to fake a smile and let her know that I was okay, even though inside I was crying. This is so recent that I'm just coming inside after speaking with the police. I am a 5'4", not very intimidating middle-aged woman. Myself and my 74-year-old neighbor met in the back alley of our apartment building to have what was already slated to be our last cigarette. As we stood there talking, this man came charging at us out of nowhere. I recognized him as he had been standing across the street from our building all evening with his bicycle and enormous bag. He wore tattered, filthy clothing and sunglasses, had a bushy beard and a head full of wild hair. Before we even knew what was happening, he crouched and leapt forward at us, one hand reaching for me and one grasping her jacket. As we both screamed, I stepped back and reached into my purse to grab my pepper spray. Thankfully, he tripped and fell to the ground. I bent down to shove my pepper spray in his face. By this time, he had jumped up off the ground with a completely deranged expression. My neighbor had her pepper spray out as well, and I grabbed my knife, which I didn't open up until he was a small distance away from us. Several more officers came, and after they searched him and his bag, one of them walked over to us while another cuffed him. The officer spoke to us and told us that he was glad we were okay, because the guy obviously had some serious psychological problems. I don't even want to know what he was saying or what was in his bag. As we waited for the police to put him into the car and finish their report, my neighbor told me that this was her last night smoking as well. Our neighborhood has been getting worse over the last few years, to the point that I've been attacked by homeless people in broad daylight 3 times in the last 4 months. Tonight makes number 4. I was already prepared to quit smoking tomorrow, and this gives me even more reason to do so. I'm glad this man is off the street tonight, and neither of us were physically harmed. Hopefully he will be in jail long enough to get started on some medication. At any rate, after the night, Ezekiel, let's not meet again. This happened a long time ago. I was about 17 at the time. My girlfriend was living with me and my parents at the time, and it was about 1 a.m. when we decided we wanted to get some snacks from the nearby convenience store. We hopped in my car and made the short drive over. When I walked in the door, I noticed a very disheveled man near the back of the store. He walked up to me and said, "Don't I know you?" I told him definitely not. I had never seen him before in my life, and I walked away and continued looking at snacks. At this time, my mom must have just heard us leave and started texting me, asking where we were and why we weren't at home. After some texts back and forth, we decided we should get home ASAP. We paid at the counter and head to the door when the homeless guy suddenly steps out from the aisle and blocks our exit. He starts getting really insistent that he knew me and that I knew him. He then started claiming that I owed him money and that he wouldn't let me leave. He kept blocking me no matter which way I tried to go. Bear in mind, at 17, I was a pretty small guy, about 120 pounds and about 5'6". I'm 5'8" now. Hooray. Finally, I'm getting freaked out and pretty scared, worried for my girlfriend and my safety. I decided to push the guy out of the way and ran out the door with my girlfriend. He followed us out, now screaming that I owed him $300 or something. My car didn't have power locks, so I had to unlock my girlfriend's door first and was headed around to my door when this guy was about 5 feet away from me. I got my door unlocked and swung it hard into him. I jumped into my car and sped off, but accidentally drove further in the parking lot instead of towards the exit. When I came back around, the guy walked in front of my car, trying to stop me. I sped up even more and he jumped out of my way. Never seen this guy again, and luckily we got away unharmed. It was definitely one of the more scariest experiences I've had.